Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on global supply chain resiliency and healthcare logistics. I'm Allie Curis, the UPS Healthcare Director of Marketing for the Americas, and I'm thrilled to be your host as we dive into one of the most critical and rapidly evolving areas in the healthcare industry. Over the past few years, or before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. So at the date of this publication, policies are evolving. This presentation is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with your own legal counsel for such advice. Do not rely on this information without performing your own research. We encourage you to submit questions as we go throughout the presentation using the Q&A function versus the chat. Now let's get started and unpack our exciting agenda for today. We'll begin by unpacking supply chain vulnerabilities, taking a closer look at the most common risks that create disruption and impact patient care. Next, we'll explore the compliance and trade landscape, breaking down current regulations, notably the geopolitical factors. From there, we'll shift to solutions and unlock practical strategies for building supply chain resiliency in action. We'll share real-world approaches and tools that organizations are using right now to adapt, recover, and thrive in an increasingly uncertain environment. And finally, we'll open the floor for a Q&A session, your opportunity to ask questions and dig deeper into any topics that resonate most with you. Before we dive in, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers, industry experts who bring deep experience across supply chain strategy, compliance, and risk management. They'll be guiding us through today's insights and sharing practical knowledge drawn from real-world challenges and successes. Today's experts include Roman Klemenko, Trade Compliance Services, Anna Garant, Customs Brokerage for Europe, and Grant Fisher, Global Customer Solutions. Now let's dive into our first agenda item, supply chain vulnerabilities. From extreme weather and cybersecurity threats to geopolitical instability, today's supply chains operate in a climate of constant disruption. In healthcare, the stakes are even higher because timely access to therapies directly affects patient outcomes. And in a global trade environment where regulations, tariffs, and policy shifts can change overnight, organizations are often forced to respond with little warning. This pressure amplifies challenges like maintaining compliance, protecting cold chain integrity, and mitigating the very real risk of shortages that can compromise patient care. Let's take a closer look at the topic that is top of mind on everyone's mind, the trade and tariff environment. While the degree of disruption may vary by sector, and we all anxiously await for August 1st, one thing remains consistent across the board. Uncertainty is the new normal. Whether you're in biotech and heavily dependent on imported components or in a segment currently experiencing fewer direct impacts, the concern across healthcare organizations is widespread. According to PwC's U.S. tariff industry analysis earlier this year, approximately $303 billion of imported goods entered the U.S. over the past year within the pharmaceutical, life sciences, and medical device sectors. Of that, $294 billion entered duty-free. For years, U.S. multinationals in the pharmaceutical, life sciences, and medical device sectors have built their global supply chains around the predictability of minimal to near zero tariffs on critical imports, everything from active pharmaceutical ingredients to surgical instruments. This long-standing trade environment has enabled cost-efficient sourcing, but with the introduction of new tariffs on goods that were previously exempt, that foundation is starting to rapidly shift. These changes have the potential to significantly disrupt established sourcing strategies, driving up manufacturing costs and placing pressure on pricing for essential medicines and healthcare technologies. In response, companies may be forced to reevaluate and reconfigure their supply chains, explore domestic alternatives, or absorb higher costs. Beyond healthcare specific tariffs, the growing use of advanced imaging technologies and minimally invasive procedures continues to drive strong demand for rare earth elements. This demand is set against a backdrop of ongoing trade tensions and highly concentrated global supply base, which creates heightened exposure to supply chain disruption amongst the medical device industry. Manufacturers of MRI systems and medical lasers continue to face risk of disruption. These are just a couple examples that highlight the wide-ranging challenges facing the healthcare industry today. But with every challenge comes an opportunity to adapt, innovate, and build a more resilient supply chain that ensures we continue delivering what matters most: better outcomes for patients. Our panel of experts will show you how you can shift from a risk management position to making trade compliance a part of your competitive advantage. With that context, I'll now hand it over to Roman, who will guide us through a deeper look at the compliance and trade landscape today.
Thank you, Alan. And before I jump into my slides, I just wanted to reintroduce myself. Roman Klemenko here, compliance manager with over 20 years of experience. I'm a licensed customs broker, and would like to pick up where Ali left off with trade compliance and the trade remedies that we have been experiencing lately. So as you aware, the rules shifts, the tariff changes, and the new requirements pop up basically overnight. And let's go ahead and do a quick review of where we are as of now. I will start with April 3rd, which is a 25% Section 232 tariff was added on vehicles. And then it expanded following on April 5th with IEEPA tariffs, where we have a 10% global, which was going to specific rate to 60 countries, but then it was quickly rescinded, and we have that 10% rate. And then while that rate was in place on April 10th for the 10%, the China Macau rate will continue to be at 125 for some time while negotiations were starting to take place. Then on April 29th, we had some additional information on stacking of aluminum and steel tariffs and the IEEPA fentanyl tariffs and how they play together. Finally, on May 2nd, we also received some additional information on the de minimis shipments. And essentially, the program of the de minimis was ceased for goods from China, Hong Kong, and Macau. And on May 3rd, 25% on auto parts took effect and applied to all countries with exception to USMCA. On May 14th, 10% of IEEPA reciprocal goes into effect, and there was a specific provision for international mail shipments. Then we had two very active dates, May 28, 29, where we had both Court of International Trade and USDC had some hearings with respect to the IEEPA tariffs and their legality. And so those were put in place and presently on stay. There is actually a hearing to be had on July 31st. On June 4th, we have the new stacking order, and we have a lot of more things to consider. We have auto parts 232, aluminum, steel, and IEEPA for both Canada and Mexico. On June 28th, we received an additional requirement that for countries that you don't know what smelt and cast is, you would have to claim UN and pay 200% duty. Couple things that I haven't mentioned here, and we need to be really careful and pay attention to the three elements. We have executive order for copper and its derivatives, which went into effect under investigation starting March 10th. And then we are looking at what potential impact that may drive. And then we have also pharmaceutical and pharma ingredients that started also investigation under Section 232 on April 1st. And finally, we also have critical minerals, which also includes semi-finished and finished goods, where investigation started on April 22nd. So today, I wanted to cover a couple things with you to see how you can be better prepared with your filing with the respective agencies, and I'll focus on FDA. So we have 12 agencies that report elements through ACE, and as you can see to the left of the slide, we have anywhere from Department of Agriculture all the way to Department of Treasury, and I will focus specifically on FDA, which is the Department of Health and Human Services. As you can see now, the universe of HTS codes covers 21,371, and those subject to PGA reporting cover a little over 8,700. So as of today, you can see this is being put into action. The legislative proposal for 2025 covers a number of new initiatives. So basically, FDA said that there were too many issues with improper product labeling, reporting, and also facility registrations that created some uncertainties for FDA and created essentially a lot of issues. And in the words of Martin McCurry, that ends today. Essentially, FDA is taking a new approach and ending a double standard. While US firms undergo surprise inspections regularly, foreign firms, for example, like India and China, have previously benefited from advance notice. Well, that ends today. And so why does it matter? It matters because pre-announced inspections have allowed foreign manufacturers to essentially mask their deficiencies by temporarily cleaning up. And then while that was happening, even with the notice, foreign firms have been found to have twice as many violations as US firms. So the scope and scale will be about 1,500 inspections globally, with 12,000 domestic, 3,000 foreign, expanding to over 90 countries. And then in July, we recently had the CSMS message that came out where they have rescinded their previously CSMS messages issued almost a decade ago that essentially allowed a less strict requirements for a number of products that cover cosmetics, dinnerware, non-medical devices like radiation emitting devices, biological samples for laboratory tests, and many more. Now, even though there is de minimis rule still in effect for many other countries outside of China, Hong Kong, and we can provide entry type 86 declaration for FDA review with some elements, which are essentially kind of like a limited number of elements. But again, the scrutiny will continue on. Our FDA does realize that this is a major shift, and it will require some preparation from both importer and trade community. So there's going to be some growing pains with this program, but that doesn't mean you have to be kind of like relaxed about it. You have to really work on your data, ensure you understand what your products in a database, and ensure that you pulling together your FDA-related information. Let's do a little bit deeper dive into some statistical data that was pulled together by FDA. So to the right side of the slide, as you can see, this data is from last year, and it shows percent of imported lines by commodity. Essentially, as you can see, the devices, medical devices, leading the pack with 47%, and it kind of ends with animal feed at 1%. And then if you look to the left of the slide, if you recall my previous slide of 21,000 HS codes, well, as you can see, nearly a quarter of those, 5,200, are subject to FDA reporting. Now, there are specific codes associated with that, like FD1, FD2, FD3, and FD4, and some of those have mandatory requirements where you have to provide FDA data elements. And for the other ones like FD1 and FD3, the data is not that mandatory. And at the bottom, you can see the program codes that are utilized to report the data. Now, those abbreviations like bio and cosmetics and devices, drugs, etc. So that's important to kind of make sure you have that data aligned to provide at the time of entry. And let's go further into the import process. So I want to give you a refresher on what happens with respect to package flow or shipment flow through FDA import process. So first, let's look at a couple of things. What is ITACS? ITACS is essentially Import Trade Auxiliary Communication Portal. It's a tool where the broker, the customer, the consignee can upload documentation, notify where the goods are available for examination, and check the status. So forget about the emails and faxes. This is your portal to have quick communication with FDA. Then you have a next stage, which is import entry review process, where you have operational administrative import team using the Predict system, and they're using the other system called Oasis to essentially screen the data. And as we go through the process flow from the importer, which typically, unless importer is self-filer, is done through the means of the customs broker, the data is submitted to ACE. Food items will go with the prior notice screening, and all other items will flow through Predict and Oasis screening. Obviously, if the goods pass the screening, they may proceed and release to U.S. commerce. However, certain commodities that lack specific data elements that are caught by Predict and Oasis screening may create some additional workflows. For example, sample collection or some additional compliance challenges like detention, for example. In that case, the review team will do additional information, and if importer provides the sufficient information, then the product subsequently is released to U.S. commerce. If the product is not in satisfactory conditions, or there are some questions from FDA, then they may detain, at which point, again, you have 10 days to kind of satisfy the condition. If you can't satisfy the conditions, then you have only two options: export it or destroy it. So while I was giving you all this breakdown, we as a filer, UPS as a filer, on a monthly basis, we receive two reports. And these are very important reports, and these are the reports that provide you the intelligence to do decision making on how you manage your master data. So as you can see on this particular slide, this is a snippet of the data elements from the FDA filer device report. This report essentially outlines all the parameters that FDA uses the intelligence to identify any gaps in the data submitted through ACE. Subsequently, that goes into Oasis and Predict. And then if there are any kind of variances that they can't reconcile, it produces the error on the report. And then at the end of the month, we receive this report, which we can actually segregate by the client, by the entry line, by the product, by the supplier. So it gives you all the analytics to identify where is the disconnect. As you can see here, we have about a dozen elements that FDA reviews, and the top 5 essentially constitute 80% of the issues. And the next report we have is the FDA drug filer report. Basically, it's the same principle. We have top 5 errors representing about 60% of the total errors. They do check for 25 various elements. And the beauty of this, whenever the report is provided to the customer actually has the tools that allows them to see, okay, exactly what does registration does not met manufacturer. You can go directly to the FDA website, see the specific data elements that are required, and subsequently you can make the changes to your master data. And the most critical part is you need to ensure that the broker does have the right level of data to make sure it is in concordance between what FDA has at the time of registration and at the time of entry submission. Which brings me to the final slide and the drive for real-time accountability, which basically says that FDA is no longer kind of tolerating the issues with non-compliance. They understand that it requires some change from both the importer and the industry. However, they want to make sure that data submitted to ITACs is accurate and timely, that you're centralizing the files within your master data to avoid erroneous reporting, and that's a critical element to be compliant with FDA. Next one, with respect to zero tolerance, again, FDA is going to be focusing on repeat offenders. Essentially, they will issue warnings here and there, detentions, refusals, but again, they're going to be going after the repeat offenders if you're not making necessary changes. And finally, through the legislative proposals, through FDA message, essentially they're saying, okay, industry, we want you to be compliant. We want this to be a part of your DNA, which means that you need to be more focused on auditing yourself harder than FDA. You need to ensure that your data elements are aligned, and you make sure that you keep a robust database of your FDA product categories, your drug information, your information from foreign suppliers. Keep in mind that if your shipment is on hold and it's an issue with a foreign supplier, it's also your responsibility as the partner to ensure they have the proper information at the time of submission. And with that said, I will turn it over to my partner, Anna Garant.
Thank you so much, Roman. And hi, everyone. I'm Anna Garant, and I'm a senior product manager for customs brokerage, currently based in Brussels, Belgium. My team and our customs brokerage teams all across the world work very closely with our customers to understand their pain points, how are they adapting to these changes in the market, and help them build sustainable solutions for customs brokerage and trade compliance. So now that we've done a deep dive into some of these changes with FDA, I'm going to zoom out a little bit and discuss some of the key trends we see with companies in the healthcare space and how are they responding strategically with all the ongoing certainty to optimize supply chains and compliance while building long-term resilience. So one of the most immediate responses we've seen to the shifting US trade policy has been diversification of trade lanes. We're seeing healthcare customers, specifically those who have a centralized US distribution model, shift flows from traditional, let's say, EU to US, now towards directly shipping to the end markets, like, let's say, Mexico, Canada, or countries in Latin America. And this shift is not just about avoiding tariffs, but also about building optionality into the supply chain and creating some redundancies to absorb future shocks. We also see mode shifting. This is another key trend around transportation and mode optimization, and typically an ongoing exercise, but we always see spikes in this type of behavior when there's a shock to the supply chain. We're seeing companies looking more closely at urgency versus cost. For urgent shipments, like let's say high-value biologics or time-sensitive devices, some are upgrading to faster modes like air freight to secure inventory positions ahead of potential delays. And then on the flip side, for less urgent shipments, we see some downgrading to more economical modes like ocean freight for, let's say, regular replenishment to offset some of the increased cost from tariffs. Another key trend we see is inventory advancement. Companies have been stockpiling ahead of this uncertainty. So according to global data, US pharma imports actually rose 70% in the first 5 months of 2025. So that shows you the urgency and immediate response to de-risking while we don't really know what's ahead with the tariff situation in the US. And also we see some shipment consolidation, so combining fewer orders to large shipments to reduce per unit cost for customs, brokerage, or transportation. And then finally, duty deferral and reduction strategies. So companies are getting strategic about how and when they pay duties. And this is not to say that duties owed to any local customs can be circumvented. But there are certain tools and programs, if your goods qualify, where you can take advantage of it and get some preferential duty treatment. So duty drawback being one, where you can potentially recover 99% of duties on goods that are re-exported or destroyed. So this could be relevant for some medical device companies with global returns and repair flows, for example. Also, free trade agreements like USMCA and other preference programs. We see many customers reevaluating these programs with attention to eligibility, documentation requirements, and classification as companies look for ways to reduce the tariff exposure. And then there's foreign trade zones, or FTZs. And I'll dive deeper into this in just a moment, but for short, FTZs can offer a way to defer or reduce or even eliminate duties altogether for goods that are stored, assembled, or re-exported from these foreign trade zones. So together, these strategies aren't just about lowering cost. They're really about building supply chain adaptability and resiliency in the long term. And companies that are thriving in this environment are the ones treating trade compliance as a strategic lever, not just a checkbox exercise. So I'll talk now about a couple of examples of how FTZs are being used by large pharma and medtech companies to create some real business advantage. So let's take a closer look here. For context, an FTZ, or foreign trade zone, is a designated area under U.S. Customs supervision that allows goods to be stored, assembled, or processed without triggering duty payment until and only if the goods are entered into U.S. commerce. So this first case study is about a pharma company, a global pharmaceutical company that produces vaccines with tight FDA approval windows. They manufacture abroad with limited manufacturing and storage capacity overseas. And their challenge really was that they needed to bring in these non-FDA approved goods quickly for seasonal rollouts because time to market was very important to them. They didn't want any bottlenecks or delays on the US border and obviously couldn't bring in non-FDA approved goods. So the solution we crafted for them was by moving the products directly into an FTZ, they avoided holding up inventory overseas. So that relieved some pressure on the manufacturing line. And the product could stay in the FTZ duty-free, waiting for FDA clearance. So once the FDA approval came, they were then able to take advantage of live daily entry to get those goods into the market quickly, being first to market with some of these critical therapeutic areas is very important. So in this case, the FTZ wasn't just a customs strategy, it was actually a great enabler for speed to market. The second case study I have here is for a medtech company. So this is a medtech company with European manufacturing and US distribution model. These products are not FDA regulated, and they serve multiple markets across the Americas. So their challenge was that they wanted to simplify the inventory management and reduce landed cost, but didn't want to trigger those US duties for goods that might not actually be consumed or sold in the US. So they began rerouting shipments to the US FTZ. And because those goods technically hadn't entered the US commerce yet, they stayed off the US financial books, and they were then stored, picked, and re-exported to Latin America, Canada, and other markets. And since they were never entered into the US commerce, no US duties were paid. And for US bound shipments, they used the weekly entry mechanism that reduced customs fees and administrative overhead. So in the end, FTZ provided them with some financial control, cross-border agility, and transportation cost savings. So really, whether you're a manufacturer, a distributor, or an innovator in the healthcare space, the FTZ toolkit is something worth considering. and our team can help you evaluate if that could be a right fit for your company. So now that we've looked at FTZs, I'll zoom out a little bit and talk about the mindset shift and the culture shift we're seeing from leading healthcare companies. In this environment, trade compliance is no longer just a cost of doing business. It's becoming a strategic asset as well. And how you approach it can really make a tangible difference on your speed, cost efficiency, and regulatory resilience. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between being proactive versus reactive in this space. And that's really something that differentiates the companies that succeed or have more challenges when there's a shock to the supply chain like this. So I've broken it down to a few key areas we see companies adapting that are getting ahead. The first is map the regulatory landscape early, especially if you're considering shifting to a new market you haven't imported into before, or you have a new product you're introducing. Rather than waiting for the issues to arise at the port or during an audit, be proactive and identify those requirements up front. So that means understanding documentation, licensing, classification needs when entering new markets, onboarding new suppliers, or launching new products into the market. We also see successful companies embedding compliance into their business process. So instead of customs as just being a final checkpoint, companies are integrating compliance into their core processes, like into product design, ERP systems, and overall SOPs. So an example could be building HS codes and origin data into the systems from the start, rather than having to then correct those things afterwards. Also, training is key. Regulations are changing frequently, as we know, and proactive companies regularly train their teams. And this doesn't just mean their compliance SME, their compliance team, but also teams that are involved in the shipping process, let's say logistics, sourcing, and commercial teams too. The whole supply chain needs to be aligned and aware of the risks, so everybody can move towards the same goal and minimize those potential risks. Also, engaging customs strategically through official programs rather than only being in contact if an issue arises, and then planning for disruption. Unfortunately, in the past few years, we've experienced several supply chain disruptions, which helps us build a playbook. And really, the readiness of alternative sourcing or routing options is what leading companies in this space really possess. So when a policy hits, they're not starting from zero. They already have a playbook in place. So all these taken together, you are able to mitigate surprises, create agility, and turn compliance into a lever for better cost control and resilience. So now here's a quick checklist for responding proactively to trade remedy actions. And if you've attended UPS webinars before, you might have seen this slide. These are a few steps we recommend healthcare companies taking now, so you're ready to act when measures hit. And if you're interested in learning more, there was a deep dive webinar actually done on this that's posted on the UPS Supply Chain Solutions website. So I'm going to quickly just hit on the key points here. So it all starts with assessing your impact. If we can go to the previous, thank you. All starts with assessing the impact of the changed tariffs. And that really starts from assessing your product classifications, making sure they're accurate, up to date, and valid for each country that you're planning on importing to. Also, it's important to validate the product origin and documentation and be ready to present those in case of an audit. Ensuring the finance side is in order is also important. So potential bonds or ACH payments set up for US imports, and investigating duty, refund, and deferral programs we already talked about. Mapping the supply chain is important to see if there are opportunities to take advantage of free trade agreements or shifting trade lanes. And ultimately, consider partnering with providers like UPS, who can help you navigate these steps with confidence. So now it's time to wrap up my section. So I wanted to leave you with a few thoughts on how to build resiliency in 2025 and beyond. First, I can't stress it enough, treat trade compliance as a competitive advantage, not just risk management. Design a flexible logistics network through mode shift strategies, alternate lanes, multi-source options, and rely on providers who can help you navigate through that. Use data to drive smarter decisions and choose partners who can help you do that, like the FDA report that Roman discussed in his section. And finally, stay informed and proactive. UPS takes pride in keeping our customers informed about these changes, but it's also recommended to check the official government sources frequently to know what regulatory changes have come into effect and how they might impact your company. So with that, it's time for the most exciting part, which is your questions, and I'll hand it back over to Ali and Grant for Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna and Roman. Today, we've explored the ever-evolving global healthcare supply chain. We dove into the compliance and trade landscape, at least where it stands today, and discussed actionable strategies organizations are using to build more resilient, patient-centered supply chains in the face of ongoing disruption. With that foundation in place, I'd like to introduce you to Grant Fisher for Q&A. Grant?
Hey, thanks, Ali, and thanks, Anna and Roman, for kind of kicking it off with some expert insights. Happy to begin the Q&A function and period here. We've got a couple pre-submitted questions that we're going to start on, but I challenge all of you as you listen to Roman and Anna provide expert insight to use that function as part of the webinar to submit anything you'd like us to try to answer live. And if we do not get to it live, we will definitely be submitting those back out to you digitally. But without further ado, Ali, you want to shoot me with the first one?
Yeah. How is UPS adapting facilities and SLAs to support handling of cold chain small package shipments in the small parcel network, specifically reagents and biospecimens?
Yeah, hey, so this question is kind of at the heart of a lot of what UPS Healthcare stands for and why we built the vertical to exist here within UPS. We've received feedback on like, yeah, hey, how does UPS manage all of this, right? And so we'll go to the next slide, and I'll start big to small here, right? What is UPS Healthcare? Well, UPS Healthcare is a flexible and applicable partner for any and all supply chain needs on a global perspective. And so when you think about it, right, you think about where are your facilities, where are the UPS Healthcare capabilities, and where can you tap into them? What you see in front of you is our network, right? Where are those facilities? Of those facilities, right, we have the cold chain offerings throughout. And there was a mention like multimodal, multi-lane shift. How can you provide kind of comprehensive coverage, right? I like to elicit it when I think about my children, right? Do they want one piece of candy or do they want the whole candy shop, right? UPS Healthcare is the whole candy shop. All modes, all capabilities, we bring them to you. And so to get to the small package, you got to start big, and you got to start big on where our facilities are. And so where would you need help in terms of, facilities where you can store products, facilities where you can distribute products out of? This is the overview of what UPS can provide on a global scale. And so we'll go to the next slide. So then let's start. How do you get to a small package shipment? Well, you've got to bring materials in, whether they be pieces for a medical device, whether they be reagents or APIs necessary for pharmaceutical production, whether they be items you need to operate within a facility. Most of that's going to come in freight. And with the most recent shifts that Roman and Anna discussed, right, we're seeing a lot of customers shift from maybe air freight to ocean freight, right? Or take things down to save money on some of those areas where tariffs are unavoidable, right? And with that shift comes the need to have that global coverage. And what you see here is our air and ocean freight service centers and cross docks, right? The question was around cold chain, right? I'm pleased to say we have 22 active cold chain cross docks today globally. We have 9 facilities that are CEIV certified to facilitate kind of consistent coverage and quality as we look at our network. We will continue to expand our cold chain capabilities, but if you think about that first slide, right, where we had our 200 plus facilities, now you look at it from where our cold chain coverage perspective, right, from a freight perspective to get me to my small package, to get me to my patient, right, full coverage, all provided through UPS Healthcare. Now let's take it. So you essentially found your facility. You've moved the bulk shipments you needed to get to a facility, whether it be yours or UPS Healthcare facility you're using. How do you get it to the patient, right? Or how do you get it to the end user? That's where UPS Healthcare introduced our Premier Global network, right? So UPS Premier is our, specialty service associated with our small package network that ensures the highest level of care we can provide and the highest level of service we can provide. Now, when you talk about UPS Premier and where does it extend beyond kind of the normal UPS network, it provides coverage from a re-icing or a cold chain uplift perspective when there is an issue, right? Say, for instance, you have maybe a shipping concern, right? You're shipping something and maybe the commercial invoice is wrong, right? There needs to be an update, right? And so it's being held. Well, what if it was held at a facility that could re-ice that shipment, right? If it was a dry ice shipment. UPS Premier allows us to support things of that nature, right? So when we think cold chain perspective, we think the need or the desire to provide the highest level of care. And when something does go wrong, there's the ability to either adjust or support that shipment to ensure efficacy of final mile delivery, right? When you think of biologics or reagents, efficacy is king, right? Most packages ship with a set number of payload. Well, they all do, right? If they're cold chain. When that payload reaches its limit, is there an ability to uplift or to support the payload and continue delivery while it still maintains the efficacy necessary to provide the patient care? UPS Premier facilitates that, right? We've got 1,100 locations globally and counting, continuing expansion, right? We've got 48 countries that are enabled today, right? And then we've got a variety of facilities globally that can provide the uplift and the support for cold chain packages as necessary. This is our service that we bring to the market specific to cold chain shippers or high value kind of healthcare shippers that want that extra level of care. What you don't see on here is a control tower and a team of people that monitor those shipments 24/7, 365, that respond proactively on our customers' behalf if there is an issue with it. So when I think back to the question, right, how are we supporting those? We support them from inception to delivery throughout with the investment into quality, capabilities, and flexibility necessary for you to scale, right, or react to an ever-changing climate.
Politics influence supply chains.
Yeah, so this is a great question, right? I mean, listen, I can't speak expertly as well as Roman did on the brokerage piece of it and FDA clearance piece of it, but geopolitics, right? They don't just influence, they reshape, right? They reset kind of how we treat supply chains. And if we look at just recent examples, so when I think recent examples, let's go back to the start of COVID, right? Where you had delays in anything and everything coming out of APAC because people couldn't work, people weren't working. The needs that we had as a consumption base in both Europe and globally essentially increased, and we had set production facilities that were subject to delays, right? So what did we have to do? We had to adjust the means at which we got delivery from targeted areas, right? So we had to be flexible. That time showed us we were very dependent on specific lanes, right? And those lanes expanded in volume and the cost to serve increased. The delays happened. A lot of supply chains were affected, right? So if you start from that point, right, we're talking recent, and then you continue to scale. The U.S.-China trade kind of, you can use the term war, maybe conflict would be a better term, right? The Russia-Ukrainian war. This had a detrimental effect on clinical trials, right? Because you essentially took a large section of the population out of the ability to support clinical trials. You look at the Israeli-Iran conflict. We shut down airspace within the Middle East. You think of the Suez Canal blockage, right? The Evergreen guy that blocked, right? You're talking about 12 to 15% of global trade affected just on blocking a single canal, right? And that's escalated recently. You even look at Brexit, right? The complete fundamental change of how we process goods in and out of Europe, right? All of these things were geopolitical actions that for our customers, right, and UPS Healthcare, we had to respond. And how do you respond to those things, right? Or how do you prevent them from catastrophic failure? You lean into capabilities, right? You lean into the ability to be flexible. And the only way you can be flexible is, right, understanding where you sit, right? Where are you tied to? What are the lanes that are important to you? And then you establish a partnership with somebody that when one door closes, 3 more are available to you to open, right? And so in all of these cases, right, certain areas, certain lanes, certain capabilities were shut down on a global scale, right? How were you able to adapt? Well, UPS Healthcare, being tied to the largest shipping and logistics company in the world, our ability to shift, adapt, evolve is essentially unparalleled, right, within the space. And then you take that and you overlay quality, you overlay cold chain capabilities on a global scale. That brings about your ability to not necessarily, eliminate risk, but manage risk, right? And to steal some of Anna's discussion, right? Like you don't want to treat it as just risk management. You want to treat it as an enablement function, right? To bring about benefit to it, right? So when you are engaging with your customers, your patients, right? You're saying, hey, I have a resilient backing supply chain that can support you on a global scale, right? And in the event there is an issue, I have answers to those questions. And uniquely at UPS Healthcare, we like to bring those answers to our customers.
How can my organization avoid disruptions for international shipments? And how can we correct issues efficiently when they arise? Great question.
I mean, I think we've touched on that throughout. At the end of the day, the first thing we have to do is we have to understand what we're doing today, right? Having a significant understanding on a global scale of how your supply chain operates, right? And where does that start with? That starts with visibility, right? There's buzzwords people throw around like AI, right? Do you know where everything is? Are you using machine learning? But at the end of the day, the visibility from inception to final product to returns management, right? To supplies management. Can I see it all? And is that in a singular place where I can look at the data and understand, is there a gap? Is there a place where I'm going to be constrained, right? And so the first thing I challenge with that is how do you avoid disruption? Is you have visibility to the whole thing, right? The next thing is how do you correct inefficiency? I'd relate it back to my comments about when one door closes, another one opens. You build the ability, you build in the ability to either scale from a cross-modal perspective. So you have a partner within your shipping system that can, if I want to go from freight to small package, I can do that. If I want to go small package to freight, I can do that. If I want to go from air to ocean, I can do that, right? If I want to go from FTL to LT, I can do that, right? You have to have a partner that has those other things you can bolt in or connect to, right? One of the things we're seeing a lot of in recent times is like, hey, how do I transition from like an NFO courier model to a small package support model, right? Well, uniquely at UPS, we have an entire precision logistics team that connects directly and leverages our Brown network at the same time, right? We parallel and work in partnership to provide a most complex solution from clinical to commercial, right? And so when you have a partner that can support every facet of your business, not necessarily are you saying, I have an issue, I have to correct it at a time. You're proactively and strategically developing a supply chain that allows you to evolve, right? Or preset yourself to make changes as you need to grow or scale and to manage some of the geopolitical things that come about it, right? None of us know what's going to happen kind of 1 August, right? But we can prepare ourselves with multiple options by having multiple available avenues to maneuver with. And so, at UPS Healthcare, right? I'm going to keep going back to the doors, right? When 1, 2, 3 doors close, right? You still got a 4th one that can open. And that's kind of a place where we have those capabilities, we have those tools to support kind of what you're trying to do. Now, again, we don't have like a crystal ball where it can't know the future, right? But what we do know is as a strategic partner, right? We have people across our organization that can solve those problems, right? You heard from our brokerage partners about solving some of those problems, right? From my team, right, what we can do at Customer Solutions from strategic business growth perspective, like scalability, the visibility I talked about, we have those pieces. We have complete arms of logistics and distribution, if that's the necessary team. We talked about the freight, ocean and air. We have a team that can support that. And all of that kind of comes together under one umbrella. That's UPS Healthcare, right? So you have, one person to engage, one team to help grow your business and respond when there is kind of conflict or issue. And so at the end of the day, communication, visibility, right? And flexibility all be the things that, you would build off of to facilitate like efficiently solving issues, right? And UPS Healthcare, we want to help you with those things, right? One of the things to think about, right, is over the last 6 months, right? There's been significant shifts in and I'll take like pharma, right? Going back to question one, biologics and reagents, right? Pharma majority, like 60-70% was produced within the APAC region, right? Whether it be China or other countries. Of that bucket, 20 to 40% of that is going to move over the next 3 to 5 years to domestic production in the US or the EU. And that's all related to kind of tariffs, right? Are you positioned to capitalize on that, right? If you're an end consumer of those things, right? Do you have those partnerships or lanes established to facilitate that, right? Have you looked at what your supply chain will look like in 3 to 5 years, based on drug pipelines, right? Based on medical device development. Those are the type of questions you want to ask. And those are the type of kind of questions that UPS Healthcare loves to partner with you on, right? And to establish kind of that connection on, hey, instead of an issue arriving that I have to correct, why not preload myself with answers to the test before the test is given, right? And so that's kind of how I think about that one, Allie.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and being part of this important conversation around healthcare supply chain resiliency. We hope the insights shared offered value and clarity, because while disruption is inevitable, how we respond is what sets us apart. With the right partners, organizations can navigate complexity more effectively, strengthen supply chains, and ultimately deliver better outcomes for the patients who rely on us.